development of educational system. Khrushchev ideas of bringing mental and physical labor closer together and strengthening the link between school and production led to radical reform of education in late 50s and early 60s. In 1958, a union law was adopted, duplicated in 1959 by a Republican law on strengthening the connection between school and life. According to it, instead of 7 and 10-year education, compulsory 8-year education was introduced, upon completion of which graduates were obligated to work for 3 years in factories or in agriculture, combining work and study, or to study in secondary polytechnic schools with industrial training. The entrances to higher education institutions was now conditioned on the production experience rather than on the theoretical training of applicants. In Kazakhstan, the transition to the new system was completed in 1962-1963. This reform caused ambitious consequences. The turnover of personnel in production and the number of transit workers on the way to higher education institutions increased. The prestige of higher education was falling. The scientists and intellectuals were used in physical, non-productive work, to the detriment of their professional activities. In 1964, some provisions of this reform were revised and compulsory 10-year secondary education was introduced. New curricula and plans began to be developed in 1970s. The charter of the secondary general education school was approved, according to which 3 stages of education were introduced: primary up to 3rd grade, 8-year, and secondary 10 years. Graduates of 8-year schools could continue their education in 10-year schools or vocational schools and specialized secondary educational institutions, after which they had the right to enter higher educational institutions. In 1970s, the number of schools decreased, while the number of students increased. Since the mid of 1970s, there has been a downward trend in the number of pupils, which was due to demographic reasons. The system of higher education continued to develop. In 1958, in order to centralize the management of higher education institutions of Republic, a state committee was formed, then transformed into Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education of Kazakhstan. The number of higher education institutions increased. If in the 50s in the Republic there were 26 higher educational institutions, by 1980s their number increased to 55, which trained more than 250,000 people.
During the period from the 1950s to the 1980s, Kazakhstan literature continued to develop, characterized by strong control of writers and poets by the party's Soviet bureaucratic machine. The Third Congress of Writers of Kazakhstan and the Second All-Union Congress emphasized the importance of studying reality based on creative mastery of Marxism and Leninism. In Moscow, the decade of Kazakh literature and art in 1958 showed the achievements of Kazakh culture. Armenian writer Awesov played a crucial role in Kazakh literature development as he completed a 4-volume novel, A Bai's Way, in 1950s. This work won the Lenin Prize in 1959. The state prize was awarded to Nurpiyevsov for his novel trilogy Blood and Sweat. Historical themes predominated during this time, particularly Yesenberin's Nomads trilogy and the works of Alimjanov, Mukhanov, Markov, Snegin, and Simashko. The period also saw the emergence of writers like Momashly, Akhtanov, Murzatayev, Kekelbayev, Shashkin, and talented people, poets like Khairbekov, Maulenov, Makatayev, Tajibayev. Süleymanov, who experiences the Soviet management of literature, produced an interesting work called Asia in 1974. However, it was deemed harmful in ideological and political terms and was banned. In the post-war period, efforts were made to study the literary heritage of the Kazakh people. A special resolution by the Communist Party of Kazakhstan in 1957 focused on this issue, leading to collections and publications of folk art and work by past poets and writers, with a 3-volume history of Kazakh literature published.
Now let's talk about music theater and cinema. The period between 1950s and 1970s became the time of further development of Kazakh musical art. The Abay Academic Opera and Ballet Theater, the State Philharmonic Society, the Choral Chapel worked in the Republic during this period. Also, Kurmangazi Academic Orchestra of Folk Instruments, Song and Dance Ensemble, Symphony Orchestra, pop ensembles like Gulder, Dosmokasan and Aygul. Kazakh singers like Tuligenova, Baglanova, Musa Khudjaeva, Kadirbekova, Musabayev, Roza Rymbayeva, Yesimov, and others became world famous. The opera and ballet art continued to develop. For example, Kuzhamyarov and Lindiev created opera Golden Mountains, Muhamedjanov created Aysulu, Zhubanova's ballets The Legend of the White Bird and Hiroshima, and many others were made at that time. Kazakh composers create a number of symphonic works. Symphonic poem, for example, Rizvangul by Kuzhamyarov, was awarded the State Prize of the Kazakh SSR. In the 60s and 70s receives a new impetus ballet art, which was associated with the work of talented ballet master Aykhanov. In the Republic, in the 50s and 70s, worked a number of professional theaters, including the Kazakh Theater, Russian Drama Theater, Uyghur Theater of Musical Comedy, Korean Musical Drama Theater, the regional Kazakh theaters in cities like Arkalyk, Jambul, Karaganda, Semipalatinsk, Taldykurgan, and Shymkent, regional Russian theaters in Aktobe, Kokshetau, Kustanay, Petropavlovsk, Taldykurgan, Uсть-Kamenogorsk, and others. In 1980, the German Drama Theater in Temirtau was opened in the Republic. The period under consideration was the time when Kazakh cinematography flourished. In 1955 until 1979, more than 70 films were made, including, for example, Our Lovely Doctor by Aymanov in 1957, The Tale of a Mother by Karpov in 1963, The Shot on the Pass by Shamshiyev in 1968, and Kazhbek by Khodjikov in 1970, and many more. Much work was done to duplicate films made at film studios in other republics of the USSR. So in general, the development of culture in the 1950s and 1980s was an ambitious process. Along with undoubted successes in various spheres, there were obvious crisis tendencies in the field of culture, caused primarily by the national policy of the USSR. There was a gradual reduction in the sphere of application of the Kazakh language. For example, 95% of books and 70% of TV programs were published in Russian, and all of his work was conducted in Russian language. In the 60s and 70s, Russian became the main language of higher education and science, and the number of Kazakh language schools began to decrease. As a result, there was a situation when about 1/3 of Kazakhs at the end of the 1970s didn't know their native language at all. This led to a reduction in the audience of Kazakh language writers and a general feeling of discomfort in inter-ethnic relations.